The rain poured down in heavy sheets, drumming against the roof of the small animal shelter tucked away at the edge of town. Inside, a golden retriever named Max rested his head on his paws, his deep brown eyes reflecting a quiet intelligence that had always set him apart from the others. Max wasn't just any dog. He had been trained as a therapy animal, helping children and veterans cope with trauma. But tonight, he was at the center of something far more dangerous than he could ever understand. Sarah, the shelter's owner, paced anxiously near the front desk, her fingers gripping her phone. She had spent years rescuing abandoned and abused animals, turning her shelter into a safe haven. But lately, something felt off. Strange men had been lurking outside, their dark SUVs idling just a little too long. Supplies meant for the shelter had been delayed or disappeared altogether. And now she had just received an anonymous tip, something about a raid, corrupt officials, and a plan that put not only her shelter, but her own life at risk. She didn't know who to trust anymore. The town had always had its secrets, whispers of certain officials working hand in hand with the cartel. Most people looked the other way, too afraid to speak out. But Sarah had never been one to stay silent, especially when it came to protecting the innocent. She had filed reports, made calls, and tried to push back against the growing corruption around her. And now, it seemed, someone had taken notice. A sudden knock at the door made her jump. It was past midnight, too late for visitors. Her heart pounded as she approached, peering through the small glass panel. Two men stood outside, dressed in suits that didn't quite fit the small-town setting. Their expressions were unreadable, but something about them sent a chill through her. Taking a deep breath, she cracked the door open slightly. "Can I help you?" One of the men, tall with sharp features, flashed a badge. "Miss Carter, we need to speak with you. It's urgent." Sarah hesitated. The badge looked official, but something about the way he held it made her uneasy. She had dealt with real officers before, ones who actually cared. These men didn't have that look. "What is this about?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The shorter man stepped forward, lowering his voice. "We have information that your shelter may be connected to certain activities. We need to search the premises." Sarah's grip on the door tightened. That's ridiculous. This is an animal shelter, not a crime scene. The taller man's expression darkened. "Then you won't mind if we take a look." Before she could respond, a deep growl came from behind her. Max had lifted his head, his ears perked up, his body tense. He rarely reacted this way to strangers, and that was all the confirmation Sarah needed. Something wasn't right. She took a step back, shaking her head. Not without a warrant. The men exchanged glances. The shorter one forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's unfortunate. We were hoping you'd cooperate." Without another word, they turned and walked back toward their SUV. But Sarah knew this wasn't over. As she locked the door, her mind raced. If these men were who she suspected, they weren't here for a simple inspection. They were looking for something or someone, and that meant she had even less time than she thought. She turned back to Max, who was still watching the door, his muscles tense. "Looks like we're in trouble, buddy," she murmured, running a hand through his fur. She needed to act fast. If these men were connected to the cartel, they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. And if the corrupt officials were involved, she couldn't count on law enforcement to help her. Her only option was to uncover the truth before it was too late. What she didn't know was that Max, the gentle therapy dog she had rescued years ago, was about to become the key to exposing everything. Sarah moved quickly, shutting off the main lights and peering through the window. The SUV hadn't left. It was parked just down the road, its headlights off. They were waiting, watching. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help her now. She turned back to Max, who was still standing near the door, his body alert. He had always been intuitive, able to sense emotions better than most humans. And right now he was tense. She knelt beside him, running her fingers through his fur. "We need to be smart, buddy," she whispered. "Something bigger is going on here." She glanced toward the back of the shelter, where the other animals were sleeping. If things went wrong, they'd be in danger too. That thought made her stomach twist. She had spent years building this place, rescuing animals that had been abandoned or mistreated. But now it seemed like someone wanted to take it all away. Sarah grabbed her phone and scrolled through her contacts. There was only one person she could trust, Daniel. He had been a detective in the city before moving back home, one of the few honest ones left. If anyone could help her figure out what was happening, it was him. She pressed the call button and waited, her fingers drumming against the counter. After 3 rings, he picked up. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "They were just here," she said, keeping her voice low. 2 men. Said they were investigating something at the shelter, but they had no warrant. I told them to leave." There was a pause on the other end. "Did they show ID?" "Yes, but something felt off, and they didn't argue when I refused." "That's not normal," Daniel muttered. "If they were real agents, they wouldn't have left so easily." Sarah glanced out the window again. "They're still here, down the road, waiting." Daniel exhaled sharply. "All right, listen. Don't open the door for anyone. Lock everything up. I'll be there soon." Sarah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Please hurry." She hung up and turned back to Max. "Help's on the way." But even as she said the words, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. She moved to the back of the shelter, checking on the animals. Most of them were asleep, curled up in their beds, unaware of the danger outside. She invited them for that. She checked the locks, making sure every door was secured. Her mind raced, trying to piece things together. Why was the cartel interested in her shelter? She had heard rumors before that certain officials were turning a blind eye to criminal activities, even helping to move shipments in and out of town. But what did that have to do with her? Then she remembered the phone call from earlier that day, the anonymous tip warning her about a raid. Whoever had called her had known something. And if they were right, the men outside weren't going to wait forever. The sound of an engine revving made her freeze. She hurried back to the window and saw the SUV pulling away. But something about it felt wrong. They weren't giving up. They were regrouping. Sarah's grip tightened around her phone. She had been worried before, but now she was afraid. 15 minutes later, Daniel's car pulled up outside. She unlocked the door before he even knocked, letting him inside quickly. He was dressed in jeans and a dark jacket, his usual laid-back demeanor replaced with something far more serious. "Tell me everything," he said, stepping inside. Sarah recounted the night's events, her voice steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. Daniel listened carefully, nodding as she spoke. When she finished, he ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. "This isn't random," he said. "Someone wants you out of the way." Sarah swallowed hard. "Why?" "I run an animal shelter, Daniel. I'm not involved in anything illegal." Daniel exhaled. "You said supplies have been disappearing, right?" "What kind of supplies?" "Food, medical shipments. Nothing expensive, but wait." Her eyes widened. "The last shipment that went missing had medical-grade sedatives, enough to put down large animals, or people." Daniel's expression darkened. That could be it. The cartel moves more than just drugs. Human trafficking, smuggling, sometimes they need ways to control people. If someone rerouted those sedatives, and they were expecting them to disappear quietly, your complaints might have put a target on your back. Sarah's stomach churned. So they think I know something. Daniel nodded. Or they think you're a problem that needs to be dealt with. Max let out a low whine, pressing against Sarah's leg. She absently stroked his head, her mind racing. "What do I do?" she asked. Daniel hesitated. Laying low isn't an option. If they think you're a threat, they'll keep pushing. We need to find proof, something that connects them to what's happening. If we can expose them, you'll have protection. Sarah's breath came out unsteady. And if we can't? Daniel met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Then we need to make sure you disappear before they make that decision for you. The weight of his words settled over her, but deep down, she knew he was right. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the shelter, the animals, and whatever secret she had accidentally stumbled into. And as Max sat by her side, his ears twitching, Sarah had the unsettling feeling that things were only going to get worse. Sarah sat in the dimly lit shelter office, her fingers tightening around a cup of coffee she hadn't even sipped. Her mind spun with everything Daniel had said. If the cartel had been using her shelter as part of their operation, whether for stolen supplies or something worse, it meant she had been in danger for a lot longer than she realized. Max sat at her feet, his ears twitching at every distant sound. He had always been a source of comfort, but tonight he was something more. A reminder that she wasn't alone in this. Daniel leaned against the desk, his brow furrowed. "We need evidence," he said. "Something solid. If we go to the authorities without proof, we'll be risking everything for nothing." Sarah exhaled sharply. And if some of those authorities are involved? Daniel didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The silence spoke for itself. Sarah knew corruption ran deep in this town, but she had never expected it to reach her doorstep. She had spent years keeping her head down, focused on her work. Rescuing animals, helping people in the community, it was all she ever wanted. But now that world was colliding with something much darker. "What about the shipment logs?" she asked suddenly. "I keep records of every supply order. If something was stolen, there might be a pattern." Daniel nodded. "It's a start. Where are they?" Sarah stood and moved to the filing cabinet in the corner, pulling open the drawer that held her records. She flipped through the folders, searching for the most recent logs. But as she reached the back of the drawer, her fingers stopped. The folder from last month was missing. She felt a chill creep up her spine. "It's gone," she whispered. Daniel straightened. "Are you sure?" Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. "I don't lose records, Daniel. Someone took it." The weight of her realization settled between them. If someone had stolen those files, it meant they had been in the shelter. It meant someone close to her, someone she trusted, was involved. She swallowed hard. "That leaves us with only one option." Daniel sighed. "We go to the source." Sarah glanced at Max, then back at Daniel. "You mean the cartel." Daniel's expression was grim. "Not directly. But someone in town has to know what's going on. People don't move shipments like that without help. We start asking questions, someone will slip." Sarah hesitated. "And what if they don't?" Daniel met her gaze. "Then we're already out of time." The words sent a fresh wave of unease through her. She had spent her life saving things, saving lives. But now it seemed like she was the one who needed saving. The next morning, Sarah locked up the shelter and left Max with one of her volunteers, instructing them not to let anyone inside without her approval. As much as she wanted Max by her side, she couldn't risk putting him in danger. She and Daniel drove into town, the tension in the air thick between them. They started at the supply warehouse, the place where Sarah had ordered her last few shipments. The owner, an older man named Miguel, had always been friendly to her. But today, when he saw her walking in, his expression changed. "Sarah," he greeted, forcing a smile. "What brings you here?" She crossed her arms. "I need to ask about my missing supplies." Miguel wiped his hands on a rag, avoiding her gaze. "I told you last time, we haven't seen anything unusual." Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Then why is my last shipment folder missing?" Miguel froze. Just for a second, but it was enough. Daniel stepped forward. "Miguel, we don't have time for games. Someone is using the shelter to move stolen goods. We need to know who." Miguel sighed, glancing toward the back of the warehouse, as if making sure they weren't being overheard. "Look, I don't know much, but I do know that some shipments never make it where they're supposed to. They get rerouted, and the people handling them, they're not the kind you want to mess with." Sarah felt a knot tighten in her chest. "Do you know where they go?" Miguel hesitated, then nodded. "There's an old storage yard on the edge of town. A few months ago, I saw some guys unloading crates there in the middle of the night. I didn't ask questions." Daniel exchanged a glance with Sarah. They had a lead. "Be careful," Miguel warned as they turned to leave. "If they think you're onto them, they won't just walk away." Sarah knew that already, but she also knew she couldn't stop now. That night, Daniel parked the car near the storage yard, cutting the headlights. The place was almost pitch black, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp near the entrance. Sarah's pulse quickened as they stepped out, moving cautiously toward the fence. The air smelled like rust and oil, the distant hum of the highway barely audible. Daniel motioned for her to stay low as they crept along the perimeter. Through the gaps in the fence, Sarah could see figures moving in the shadows. A group of men unloading crates from a van. "This is it," Daniel whispered. "They're moving something now." Sarah's breath caught as she spotted one of the crates being pried open. Inside were bottles, medical supplies, just like the ones that had gone missing from her shelter. Her stomach churned. She wasn't just caught in the middle of something dangerous. She was in the middle of a full-scale operation. Daniel pulled out his phone, snapping quick photos. "We need to get this to someone we trust." Sarah barely heard him. Her eyes were locked on one of the men by the van. His face was partially hidden by the shadows, but she recognized him instantly. Her heart nearly stopped. It was Officer Grant, one of the local cops, someone who was supposed to protect the town. Daniel followed her gaze, his face darkening. "That's our confirmation," he muttered. Sarah felt a wave of nausea. If the cartel had law enforcement on their payroll, it meant there was nowhere safe to turn. Before she could respond, Max's familiar bark rang out in the distance. Her stomach dropped. She had left him at the shelter, which meant someone had found him. Sarah's heart pounded as Max's bark echoed through the night. She turned sharply, her breath catching in her throat. He was supposed to be safe. She had left him in trusted hands. But now his bark wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. Daniel grabbed her arm. "Sarah, we have to move." "Now." She hesitated for half a second, torn between running toward the sound and the danger it meant. But before she could make a decision, the men by the van stopped what they were doing. They had heard it too. One of them muttered something to Officer Grant, who immediately pulled out his phone. The air shifted. In an instant, the quiet operation turned into something much more hostile. Sarah and Daniel ducked behind a stack of rusted metal crates as two of the men started scanning the area. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, sweeping dangerously close. Daniel whispered, "We need to get out of here before they figure out we're watching them." But Sarah's mind wasn't on their escape, it was on Max. If he was barking, it meant someone was at the shelter. Someone who shouldn't be there. She pulled out her phone with shaky hands and dialed. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Sarah. It was Mia, the volunteer she had left in charge. Her voice was barely a whisper, but Sarah could hear the fear. Mia, what's happening? I don't know. A man came to the shelter. He was looking around, asking weird questions. I told him we were closed, but then Max started growling. And now, Sarah, he's inside. He's looking for something. Sarah's blood ran cold. Mia, listen to me. Get out. Take Max and go. Don't stay there. Mia hesitated. But, now, Mia. There was a rustling sound, a creak of a door opening. Then the line went dead. Sarah sucked in a breath, trying to fight back the panic clawing at her. Max was in danger. Mia was in danger. Daniel didn't wait for an explanation. He could see it on her face. We're going, he said firmly. The two of them moved fast, staying low as they maneuvered around the storage yard. The cartel members were still distracted, trying to figure out where the bark had come from. They had seconds before someone realized what was happening. Just as they reached the fence, a shout rang out. There. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on them. Sarah didn't think, she ran. Daniel was right behind her, his footsteps pounding against the ground. A gunshot cracked through the night, hitting a metal crate just inches from Sarah's shoulder. Her breath came in ragged gasps as they sprinted toward the car. If they could just make it. Another shot rang out. Daniel yanked the car door open, practically shoving Sarah inside before diving into the driver's seat. The tires screeched as he floored the gas, the vehicle fishtailing for a second before lurching forward. In the rearview mirror, Sarah saw two men running after them. But they didn't shoot. That meant one thing. They're following us, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's grip tightened on the wheel. Then we don't stop. The city blurred past them as they sped through the streets. Sarah's pulse refused to slow. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every turn felt like a trap. She dialed Maya's number again. No answer. Come on, she whispered. Pick up. Nothing. The shelter wasn't far, but every second felt like an eternity. Daniel took another sharp turn, tires screeching against the pavement. When we get there, you grab Max. We don't wait. Sarah nodded, her stomach twisting with fear. When they finally reached the shelter, the gate was ajar. The lights inside flickered. Something was wrong. Sarah barely waited for the car to stop before she threw the door open and ran inside. The front desk was empty. A chair was overturned. Papers were scattered on the floor. Then she saw it. Maya's phone, lying face down near the door. A cold dread settled in her chest. Max? Her voice cracked. Silence. Then footsteps. Not hers. Not Daniel's. Someone else was inside. Sarah's breath hitched as the footsteps grew louder. She pressed herself against the wall, her pulse hammering in her ears. Daniel was right behind her, his hand gripping her wrist as if to remind her they weren't alone. The dim light flickered again, casting shifting shadows across the shelter's hallway. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and dog food, but underneath it lingered something else, something wrong. A low growl rumbled from the back room. Max. Sarah's heart twisted. If he was growling, someone was still inside. Daniel signaled for her to stay low as he crept forward. He reached for the door handle, but before he could turn it, the door swung open. A man stepped out, his face partially obscured by the poor lighting. His jacket bore the emblem of local law enforcement, but the way he carried himself, the way his eyes darted toward the exit, Something about him felt off. Sarah knew corruption ran deep, but to see it standing in front of her was something else entirely. The man froze when he saw them. For a second, no one moved. Then, without a word, he bolted. Daniel lunged after him, grabbing at his sleeve, but the man twisted free, shoving Daniel hard enough to send him staggering back. Sarah barely had time to react before the man drew a gun. "Stay where you are," he ordered, his voice eerily calm. Max barked furiously from inside the room, his paws scratching at the door. The man's eyes flicked toward the sound, and for a split second, his focus wavered. It was enough. Daniel moved first, slamming into him before he could react. The gun went off, the shot deafening in the small hallway. The bullet embedded into the wall just inches from Sarah's head. She didn't think. She grabbed the nearest object, a metal clipboard, and swung it as hard as she could. It cracked against the man's wrist, sending the gun clattering to the floor. Max's barking intensified, and before the man could recover, the door burst open. The golden retriever lunged, his teeth snapping as he barreled into him. Sarah had never seen Max act aggressively before, but right now he wasn't just a therapy dog, he was a protector. The man struggled, kicking wildly, but Max didn't back down. Daniel grabbed the gun and aimed it at him. "Who sent you?" Daniel demanded. The man clenched his jaw, refusing to speak. Sarah's mind was racing. If this man was working with a cartel, why was he here alone? Why go after Max? Then she saw it. A small black device on the floor, blinking red. It wasn't a gun. It wasn't a phone. It was a tracker. Realization hit her like a punch to the gut. They weren't just after the shelter, she whispered. They were tracking Max. Daniel's eyes darkened as he reached down, snatching the device. They didn't come to destroy evidence. They came to take him. Sarah's stomach dropped. Max wasn't just a witness. He was the key to something bigger. The man on the floor sneered. "You have no idea what you're up against." But Sarah did. And for the first time, she realized the cartel wasn't trying to cover their tracks. They were hunting something, and Max was the only one who knew what. Max stood over the man, his teeth bared, chest rising and falling with controlled aggression. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the blinking tracker on the floor. It all made sense now. The cartel wasn't just cleaning up loose ends. They needed Max because he had seen something they couldn't risk getting out. Daniel kept the gun trained on the man. "Talk, now." The man smirked, his breath shaky but defiant. "It's too late. They know where you are." A cold wave of fear settled over Sarah. She grabbed Max's collar, holding him close, feeling his steady presence against her leg. They didn't have time. If reinforcements were on their way, they had to move fast. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Then we take him with us." The man scoffed. "You won't make it out of here." But Daniel wasn't listening. He pulled the man to his feet, gripping his arms behind his back. "Sarah, get Max. We're leaving." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She grabbed Max's leash and yanked open the door, scanning the darkened streets outside. It was quiet, too quiet. Then headlights appeared in the distance. A black SUV. No plates. Sarah's pulse quickened. Daniel. He saw it too. Without another word, he shoved the man forward. "Run." They sprinted toward Daniel's car, the wind slicing through the silence. Behind them, tires screeched as the SUV accelerated. Sarah threw open the back door, practically lifting Max inside before diving into the front seat. Daniel shoved the man into the back and jumped in. "Hold on." The car roared to life, tires spinning as they sped out of the parking lot. The SUV was right behind them, closing the distance fast. Sarah's mind raced. They had the cartel's man, but what good would that do if they didn't make it out alive? Max let out a deep warning growl, his body tense. Daniel glanced at Sarah. We need a way to lose them. Sarah scanned the streets ahead. They couldn't outrun them forever. But then she spotted it. A construction site, barely lit, half-finished roads leading in different directions. There, take a left. Daniel didn't hesitate. He yanked the wheel, the car fishtailing before skidding onto the gravel road. The SUV followed, gaining ground. The unfinished site was a maze of scaffolding, deep pits, and abandoned machinery. Daniel swerved between barriers, the SUV struggling to keep up. But then, gunfire. Bullets shattered the back windshield, glass raining into the car. Sarah ducked, heart pounding. They're trying to take us off the road. Max barked wildly, his instincts on high alert. Daniel's face was set in stone. Hold on. He slammed the brakes. The SUV sped past them, the driver unable to react in time. In the split second they had, Daniel yanked the wheel again, sending them down a narrow path between two unfinished buildings. The SUV tried to follow, but it was too big. The walls scraped against its sides, metal screeching as it slowed. Daniel didn't wait to see what happened next. He hit the gas, speeding toward the other side of the site. By the time they reached the main road, the SUV was gone. Sarah exhaled, her entire body trembling. Did we lose them? Daniel didn't answer right away. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Empty. For now. Sarah turned to look at their prisoner. The man's smug expression was gone, replaced with something else. Fear. They won't stop, he muttered. You don't know what you've just done. Sarah's grip tightened on Max's collar. Then start talking. The man hesitated, but then, maybe realizing he no longer had a choice, he sighed. It's not about drugs, not money, it's something bigger. Daniel's hands clenched the wheel. Then what? The man looked at Max. Sarah's stomach twisted. Max whimpered slightly, sensing the weight of the moment. The man took a breath. He wasn't just a therapy dog, was he? Sarah's blood turned to ice. Daniel's grip tightened. What are you saying? The man's voice was grim. That dog, he was at the wrong place at the wrong time. He saw something. And now the cartel isn't just after you. His eyes locked onto Sarah's. They're after him. The car fell into heavy silence. Max, sitting between them, let out a quiet, knowing whimper. The weight of the man's words hung heavy in the air. Max wasn't just a therapy dog anymore. He was a witness. The cartel had gone to extreme lengths to track him, which meant whatever he had seen was valuable enough to kill for. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, gripping the wheel as if holding on to control. Sarah turned to Max, her fingers brushing through his fur, as if grounding herself in the warmth of his presence. He was just a dog, loyal, gentle. How could he be the center of something this dangerous? The man in the back seat shifted, his confidence cracked. You don't get it. They won't stop until they have him. Daniel exhaled sharply. Then we make sure they never get the chance. Sarah looked at Daniel, searching his face for a plan. They had no weapons, no backup, and no guarantee the cartel wouldn't find them again. But they had Max, and they had the truth. She glanced at the tracker still blinking on the floor. A thought formed. What if we use it against them?